This is Mitch, and welcome to the Real Estate Investor Summit podcast. I have Rob Walch on the line, and he is going to talk to us about, he's with Libsyn, and Libsyn is the largest hoster of podcasts in the world, and he's going to talk to us about what they do, and we're going to talk about how podcasting in general can help your business, not just the real estate business, but any business. To drive customers, to make people aware, to get your name out into the marketplace, and find the people that are interested in your niche. So before we start that, I need to pay homage to my sponsor today, taxfreefuture.com. Please go to taxfreefuture.com. If you do not have a tax-free or tax-deferred investment vehicle with checkbook control, you have no idea the size of the tool that you are missing in your tool belt. It's huge. If compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, then probably growing your investments without having to pay tax or deferring tax for decades is probably the ninth wonder of the world. So please go to taxfreefuture.com, watch the 37 video vignettes there, and find out just how powerful tax-free or tax-deferred investing can be. All right, done with that. Thanks. We got the podcast sponsored today. So how you doing, Rob?
Good, Mitch. Thanks for having me on the show.
Hey, so tell us a little about you, and then tell us a little bit about Libsyn and what they're about.
So I'm the VP of Podcast Relations at Libsyn. I'm also the host of a podcast called Today in iOS, co-host of a podcast called The Feed, and then host of one called Podcast 411. I've been podcasting since 2004, and Libsyn has been hosting podcasts since 2004, and I've been with Libsyn since 2007, so I've been with them 12 and a half years. And for those not familiar with Libsyn, we are the largest, the oldest podcast host out there. We host 22% roughly of all the podcast episodes in Apple Podcasts. I don't think anyone else is even 10% on that number. And we help anyone get their podcast out everywhere. I mean, that's where Libsyn's specialty is. We help you distribute your podcast everywhere.
Wow. So I had gotten to where personally I had reached, I was running dry on my list. I was starting to go through the same people and try to mine through the same data that I could get my hands on. So I started a podcast to increase my reach and to increase the awareness out there that I existed and what I did. One thing I'm real clear on is that podcasting works for all kinds of businesses, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we see it for every niche you can think of. And it's a great way actually for people that have a client-based business where you're trying to grow with more clients. If you know who those clients are, start a podcast and then reach out to those clients, potential clients, and interview them on your podcast. So you do a podcast about that topic, and rather than cold calling someone and saying, hey, I want you to be my client, you cold call them and say, hey, I think you're brilliant and I want to share your brilliance with my audience. That is the type of email that gets replied to. And then once you interview them, you build a rapport and go, oh, by the way, I do this business on the side. If you ever need somebody, let me know.
Well, that's funny you bring that up, because that's exactly how I get into a lot of people that I want to talk to. There's a lot of people that you can go and ask them, hey, can I take you to lunch? And that's never going to happen in a million years. You ask them, would you like to be on my podcast? I'd love to interview you. It's a whole different response, and 95% of the time it's yes. And it's a great way to start building that relationship. So how hard is it to start a podcast? What do you need? What do you need?
It's not hard to start a podcast. It's like IKEA furniture. It might look daunting when you look at all the instructions and all the pieces laying on the floor. But if you take it one step at a time, doing a podcast isn't difficult. You need a microphone. You want a mic, a halfway decent mic, a quiet room, and a laptop, and you can record. Yeah, it doesn't take long. There's free tutorials out there to teach you how to podcast. If you go into Apple iBooks, you can look for One Podcast 101. It's a free iBook I have out there that you can download and learn how to podcast. You can be podcasting in a couple of days, or actually a couple of hours, really.
Wow, that's encouraging, especially that there's help out there, because a lot of people look at podcasting as a major event, and it really is a major event, but it doesn't take as much as you might think if you have the help from the right people. what do successful podcasts what did successful podcasts do? What are they when they start and hit the record button? What does a successful podcaster do?
Well, I mean, you can look at the most successful one, Joe Rogan. He hosts with Libsyn, and it's about the content. It's really about focusing on the content for the audience. It's marketing. A lot of people think marketing your podcast is going to be the most important thing. That's the least important thing. Creating good content is the most important thing, because great marketing doesn't matter if your podcast is horrible. If your goal is to grow a large audience, one, you have to have a topic that appeals to a large audience. I mean, there's a podcast called the Chameleon Breeder podcast, which is about chameleon breeding. It doesn't matter how much money and effort that person puts, doesn't matter even how good that podcast is. He's going to be limited in the niche that podcast falls under. And he has a good podcast, and he has a decent size audience for that size podcast, and he actually makes good money from it. But the point is, you have to understand your show, who your audience is, and then concentrate on the content. Because you create good content, that's what's most important. If you get an audience of 500 people listening to your podcast and you have a niche, that's a really good size audience. I mean, I always say to people, think about the last time you were in front of a room of 500 people that you got up and spoke in front of. Very few people that speak get to speak in front of 500 people. I've spoken hundreds of times, only a dozen times have I gotten to audiences that size. So you can do with a podcast, you can get 500 people that are in your audience and you're speaking to them every week. And that's really a powerful thing if you can get to that level.
Yeah. And so, some people can do podcasting for a hobby just because they like it, but it really, you can take it to a different level and start to monetize your podcast. If, like you said, you're a client-based service or business, or if you sell a product, it really helps to have those things in the background. But like you said, we shouldn't go into the podcast trying to make a sale. We should go into the podcast trying to make a relationship and trying to build an audience who's interested in what we're interested in, or like-minded people.
Right. I would say that if you're getting into podcasting for the sole purpose of monetizing directly from that podcast, and you say, my business model is I'm going to build a big audience and I'm going to monetize through advertising, take any money you are about to invest in podcasting, go to the local Indian casino and put it all on black or red. Your odds are so much better of making money, because only about 1 in 11, 1 in 12 podcasts, 1 in 4, I think actually the last time I ran, it was 1 in 14 podcasts really even monetize. So most podcasts don't monetize, don't ever get to the numbers where they can monetize directly through advertising. So if that's your business model, it's a failed business model. The chances of it happening are 1 in 14, even 1 in 10. And by the way, all the horse tracks in the US get you better odds than making money through podcasting.
Wow, I did not know that. So I may be one of those 1 in 14 anomalies. I mean, I did not start my podcast though to monetize. It just happened that there was a lot of peripheral products in coaching programs and stuff that fit into my audience. And there was a lot of different ways to make money in real estate, which is what I do for a living. That's what my audience is either young investors or young entrepreneurs who are trying to figure out how to get to the financial freedom side of the equation. And so I stumbled into it completely by accident. I also realized one thing though, when I was going to start the podcast, you have to be in it for the long haul, right? Because like you don't get an audience in the first week. And even if you're going to monetize, you got one person, one affiliate on the first day that you do an interview with a guy who has an affiliate program. You got one podcast, When my podcast started becoming a little bit more lucrative in the affiliate side was when there was 50, 60, 70 podcasts archived, and people, and 3/4 of them had a product to offer. And then when they got on to interview, like you say, Rob, you got to deliver content or everyone will just turn you off, because no one wants, you all see those things on cable TV where they're selling vacuum cleaners and they're selling blenders and they're selling Joe Foreman cooker things. Yeah. And the whole show's about that. Like, how many people tune into that? Not
very
any.
few. Right. Yeah. And, most people that monetize through podcasting don't do it even directly through advertising. They do it through building up a brand, building up their business, or getting a job. One of my favorite stories is a guy that he'd stopped podcasting. I asked him why he stopped, and he goes, well, his podcast was about his favorite soccer team in the UK, Manchester United. And the marketing team liked his podcast so much they hired him, and he had to stop the podcast. So he got his dream job from his podcast. So there's ways to monetize, not directly through the podcast, but because of the podcast. Other people get career advancements, they get promotions at work because they have a podcast at their company, and they start interviewing people inside the company, and they interview the CEO and other people. And then when job openings happen, people remember this person at the company that was interviewing them, and they go, oh, he would be good for this, or she would be good for this. So there's a lot of people that have made money from podcasting, but not directly. So yeah, you have to do it long haul. You have to be in it for the right reasons. But if you're in it for the quick buck, that's why a lot of people quit. I mean, a lot of people quit podcasting before they get to 10 episodes. And then there's another big group that drop around 50. What happens with the ones before 10, they go, oh, this is more work than I thought, more than blogging. Well, creating good content is actually the hard work. And then the other group quit around 50 because they've been doing one episode every week for a year, and their audience is 50 people. Well, they realize they're never going to monetize after a year, and they get out of it. The problem is when you look at those shows, a lot of times they hit record, they hit stop, they don't edit, they don't do any research. They spend, for a half an hour or 45 minutes episode once a week, they spend 50 minutes on that 45-minute episode. And they think, well, that was enough. No, you have to put time and effort into it.
Okay, so when I started the RE Investor Summit podcast, the Real Estate Investor Summit podcast, I said I'm going to go for a year at least, and I realized that you had to get off to a fast start, and I committed to do 6 podcasts a week because I knew that to get an audience, I had to interview, and I was JVing with the people that I was interviewing, which meant they were going to send the podcast to their audience. And so whether my audience was 50 people, they might have 2,000 people in their list. So I knew that the more people I interviewed that had a following, the faster I would get a bigger audience, because at least their interview would go out to their audience. And so if I did 6 a week, then it would move a lot faster. And we were right about that. One thing I didn't realize is people binge listen to podcasts. If you have a bunch of archived segments, people binge listen to them like they binge watch Netflix series, whatever. I had no idea that people were that into listening to that many podcasts. I have about 300 archived podcasts right now, maybe a little more. And I'm really surprised at the amount of people that say, I've listened to every single one of your podcasts, and I'm always waiting for the next one to come out. I'm down to just 2 a week now. Just because I built up,
right.
And I couldn't keep that pace and still have all my other jobs and businesses, but I was willing to commit a year to get it off the ground. Where is Libsyn located? Where is it?
Our main offices are in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And then we have people throughout the U.S., but our main office, the majority of the Libsyn employees are in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Yeah,
I'm sure they do a lot of things virtual. What's another interesting success story off the top of your head, if you can, of a podcast gone well?
Oh, we got a lot. I mean, a lot of the top ones. I mean, Aaron Mahnke with Lore started with us. Mark Maron, WTF. Mark Maron, his podcast is with us. Hardcore History, Dan Carlin, his podcast is with us. So, those are ones that have done well. John Lee Dumas, his podcast is with us. Pat Flynn's podcast is with us. So a lot of the podcasts that people know of are hosted on Libsyn. And because of that, we're able to get those podcasts out into different places. So we were the launch partner getting a podcast into Pandora and Spotify and all these other places. And I think really that's what's changed in podcasting, and why podcasting has become so popular now is any place people listen to audio today, any of the music services now support podcasting. And that's really what's really helped podcasting. But we have so many success stories. We go back, you look at any of the top podcasts, but even we mentioned earlier, the Chameleon Breeder podcast is a good success story. There's a podcast doing well, making money, but in a real small niche. We've got beekeeping podcasts that get 3,500 downloads per episode about backyard beekeeping. So it's just some amazing numbers that I see from shows in small niches.
Well, it's just a tribute to the reach of podcasting, right? And the thing I like about podcasting is you're open to the world, aren't you?
Yeah, and that's it. It's a global audience. You can find audience everywhere. We have downloads every country in the world. We see downloads from North Korea. Not many, but we see a few.
Yeah, until they get executed, right? Let's talk about the prospect of being able to be in your home and open up a global business. I mean, it makes you kind of think that you should sit down and think about what your podcast is about. What, if you want to monetize eventually, what is that product? What is the product? I don't think though that podcasts are very good if you're not passionate about whatever it is you're talking about. So if you just sat down to say, well, X is a product that everybody can use in the whole wide world, so I'm going to start a podcast on that. I don't know if that flies if you're not passionate. I've noticed.
It doesn't. Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to figure where is the puck going to, and that's not a place you want to be, and you try to get a podcast out there and go, you know what, I'm going to do a podcast about the impeachment, but you actually aren't interested in politics, podcast probably is not going to be that good. If you're going to do a podcast, about global warming, you see that's a big trend, but you're kind of don't believe in global warming, podcast probably is not going to be that good. So you have to really do it on a topic that you believe in, that in your heart, that you think about. I always say to people, what are the podcasts that you currently listen to? And that's another thing. If you're not listening to podcasts, there's a good chance you're not going to be around podcasting very long. So what are the podcasts you listen to? Why are you listening to them? And then do a podcast similar to them. You're going to bring your own personality to that podcast. That's going to make it different than the other podcasts you're currently listening to. So don't worry that someone's already doing that topic. But if it's something that you're passionate, you're listening to, yeah, do it on that topic as well.
I think that's a huge point, because one of the concerns when we were thinking about doing my podcast was, who wants to listen to little old Mitch Stephen? No one knows me. I'm not famous. I got a face made for radio. I know that. Why is anyone gonna wanna listen to me? And I just took the stance of, I'm going to go do the best I can, deliver the most I can, and see what happens. I had like zero expectations, other than the fact that I expected myself to get up and stay with it for a year, no matter what. And then at the end of a year, I was going to make a decision if I thought it was something I wanted to keep doing. So it turned out to be another profit center for me, but I didn't, like you said, I didn't go into it for that. And I think a lot of people would have that fear. Who's going to want to listen to me? Or who's going to,
Yeah, you have that's just, everybody gets that, right? When you're starting, the worst probably is not having that fear. If you're not worried that people are going to listen to you, you may, it's okay to be afraid. You have to start worrying when you're not afraid, right? That's where people get into trouble. Fear is a good thing. Fear is a motivator. It's okay to be afraid that your show is not going to do well. Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, Dan Carlin is, by number of individual listeners per episode, one of the largest podcasts out there. It gets multiple million downloads per episode. And I remember about a year and a half ago, he sent me a text message saying, hey, is the episode coming out? He goes, yeah. He goes, I hope this one's good. He goes, I'm due for a failure. I'm due for a bomb. He was paranoid his next episode wasn't going to be good. This guy's got millions of downloads per episode. You have to have that fear. And that's a good thing to have. That motivates you.
Yeah. Being afraid makes you struggle to, or strive to make sure your content's the most you can get out of it.
You can't phone it in. The people whose shows fail are the ones that just phone in. I don't have to try. I'm just going to hit record. I'm going to hit done. I know what I'm talking about. I don't need to research. Those are the ones that fail.
What do you say about the length of podcasts? I've heard like people say, well, people's attention span isn't over 6 or 7 minutes or 15 minutes, and your podcast should be short. And I say, I like to interview until it's not fun anymore. If that's 30 minutes or 15 minutes, and when I say not fun, I just mean there's no place else to go, or I don't know what else I don't know any more content I can get out of it. I stop it there, but if we're having an engaging conversation, you keep going. What is Libsyn's data show on podcast, the length of a podcast? Do they show any?
So yeah, I went, and this is something I talk about quite often. I went and I looked at shows on Libsyn that were getting 100,000 downloads or more. So we're talking about where the audience has voted that these are the good shows, right? The audience has spoken and said, these are the most popular shows. And I looked at that. 84% of those shows with 100,000 downloads or more were 51 minutes or longer. That's 51 minutes. Only 6% were less than, or 22 minutes, or actually 30 minutes or less. 12% were 2 hours or longer. And when you actually go and look at Apple Podcasts overall, and again, Libsyn's the largest, but if you look at Apple Podcasts overall, it's similar data. The median, when you looked at the top 200 episodes in Apple Podcasts, what we found was 65 minutes was the average for the top 200. 75% were 41 minutes or longer overall. And that's with the NPR podcasts in there skewing things down a little bit. But the reality of the situation is length won't hurt you. Now, I have to put two big caveats on this. Don't be long thinking it's going to make your show popular. Taking 15 minutes of content and spreading it out over 2 hours is what we call Star Wars Episode 1. It didn't work, right? That doesn't work, taking 15 minutes and trying to make it a 2-hour episode. Also, don't go the other way. Don't go, well, I want to get this into this 40-minute or 35-minute length. That's what some consultant told me is the right length, or 22 minutes. That's the worst advice. Anybody is familiar with HBO's Game of Thrones understands season 8 was 16 episodes that HBO shrunk to 6. That didn't work either. So if you have 2 hours of content, do a 2-hour episode. If you have 45 minutes, do a 45-minute. You got an hour, do an hour. Don't change your episode length for fitting some ideal. Just do the length of episode that you have the content for that episode. And next week, it could be a different length. It's okay to have a 45-minute episode one week and an hour and a half the next.
Man, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because so many people that, from the outside will go, man, your podcasts are long. Do people really stay that long? I said, I don't know. It's just some of these topics, you can't fit them into 15 minutes and do justice. It's too big a topic. There's too much to talk about. And as long as there's something to talk about and it's interesting and engaging, then let's keep going. And if it goes 2.5 hours, maybe you just break it into 2 segments, or 3 segments, and say, this is so interesting. We're going to have you again on the next podcast, and we'll do it again after that. But we're going to finish this topic, because I've met people that are so interesting and so involved in what they do, to get down to how it's really working for them or how they really work it. You have to spend the time.
Right.
And
I'd just say that if you took all those consultants that are out there telling you to do the 22-minute or 30-minute episodes, and you combined all their downloads for all their podcasts, if they even have any, and you combined all their downloads, they wouldn't equal one episode of Joe Rogan, whose episodes are 2.5 to 3 hours long.
Right.
Don't worry about length. Don't worry about it.
Joe Rogan's so successful. Can you tell us? Do you know? Or you have an idea?
Yeah, he just didn't listen to all the bad advice that's out there from all those consultants. He just did his own show. He released episodes when he wants to release them. He doesn't release on the same day every week at the same time. He releases some weeks 1 episode a week, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, sometimes none. He's off elk hunting. Right? He releases the content when he feels that it should be released, and how often he feels he should release it. And he lets the episode and interview length go as long as he wants to go. He doesn't worry about some artificial limit and length He doesn't try to meet some norms. He doesn't go out asking people to rate and review his show. He doesn't ask people to do all this stuff. He just creates good content, and then the audience goes and promotes it on their own. And that's the secret.
Wow. So there's probably questions I'm not even smart enough to ask. Do you know some other interesting content that we would need to know about Libsyn and podcasting, or have I run my hosting course so far?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest advice I tell to people is just get started. Start with one episode. When you launch with one. Don't worry about launching with 10 or that. We've actually looked at shows that launch with 1, 3, 5, and 10 episodes. And the shows that launch with 10, 6 months later, tend to do a lot worse than the ones that launch with 1. Reason is people that launch with 10, oftentimes what they forget to do is they forget to have interaction with the audience. And if you really want to grow your show, in most cases, you need to have a call-in number. You need to have some sort of feedback mechanism. You have to have it where people can call into your show, send you email feedback, because your listeners are the ones that are going to promote your show. All right? So for most shows, it's your listeners that are going to grow your show. And if you don't have a way to interact with them, and you go and launch 10 episodes on day one, what happens is people start listening to the show and they realize there's no listener feedback, so they're not going to get part of it. And those people that would have been advocates, would have promoted your show, kind of get turned off by those shows. So now there are exceptions. And again, but overall, when we looked at the general stats, 1, 3, 5, and 10 launches, the ones that launched with 1 did the best, 3 was close, 10 were the worst. So just launch your first episode, get out there and get going.
It goes against all the norms, doesn't it? Podcasting is a wild card. There's no rules. It seems like very few rules. The biggest no, I suppose, is get on there and have bullshit content, or have no content. That would be the number one mistake. But what are the other obvious mistakes? Are there any other obvious mistakes?
I mean, some of them is day one, I'll hear a podcast on the first episode. Hey, and support us on Patreon. What? You just started your show. Wait a second. Time out. Give your audience a chance to get to know you, get some content going. Don't be launching with a Patreon. I mean, I'm waiting to hear a trailer episode where the thing is, hey, our podcast is going to launch next month, but you can start supporting us now on Patreon. Right? I'm waiting to hear that.
Well, I don't know what Patreon is. What is that?
That's another way people can make some money, where you ask your audience to donate. Think of it like taking a hat and asking people to put money in a hat.
Oh, okay. It's like GoFundMe or something, right?
Yeah. It's Begware. It's where you're asking your audience to donate to your show. It's not for everybody. Some people are like, oh, I'm going to do this Patreon. Well, then they'll sign up to the Patreon and then they don't ask the audience to donate because they don't feel comfortable asking the audience to donate. It's not for everybody. If you're not the type of person that feels comfortable walking around with a hat in your hand, asking people to put money in it, Patreon and other donation models like that, Glow, and there's others, aren't probably the right thing for you. So you have to always understand who you are. And I think that's the most important thing in podcasting is know yourself, because you're going to be different than every other host out there, every other podcast out there. And you have to do your show and your business model around what works for you, what you feel comfortable doing. If you don't feel comfortable talking about Harry's razors, and you don't feel comfortable this is my head freshly shaven with the Harry's razor. And oh, wait a second. I can see you much clearer with my Warby Parker glasses now. If you're not comfortable pitching the products that people want you to advertise, then advertising is probably not right for you either. So you have to find out what's right for you, what you're comfortable with.
Well, what I had accidentally stumbled into was a topic, real estate, that had so many different ways to make money in it that I decided that personally what I was going to do is I didn't care which way you picked. I was just trying to find a way for you to break free of your job or make that extra whatever money you needed to make by finding somebody out there that was doing something that you could relate to that you wanted to do. That's the quest of my podcast.
So Mitch, when did you start in the real estate side of things?
1996.
When did you start your podcast?
3 years ago. So
right. So you had a little bit of experience about what you were talking about, right? So you did it the right way. You came into a topic you knew. You not just knew, was your life. You were passionate. I mean, you hadn't done it from 1996 to 2016, for 20 years because you weren't interested in it. You were obviously interested and you knew what you were doing. And that's important. I say the same thing to the folks out there. You don't start a podcast the same day you're going to start covering that topic. Right? If you don't know that topic, you're going to fail. You have to have background on that topic.
Yeah. So, one of the things I joke about is like, I started talking about real estate in 1996, and that conversation has never ended. If my eyes are open, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about it with somebody, about some aspect of it somewhere. And if I get off topic for even a short period of time, I'll be right back in a minute. Just hold on. Let me go down the little rabbit hole for a second. And I'll be right back on real estate.
Right. So if you want to know folks, if you're listening, you want to know what to do a podcast on, go to your significant other and go, what do I talk about too much? There's your topic.
I love that. I love that. What do I talk about too much? What do you wish I would never talk about again? Okay, There we go. All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. I want people to go to REinvestorSummit.com/podcast hosting, and there we'll have all the information so you can hook up with Libsyn and get whatever they have to offer, tutorials or advice, maybe a consultant to help you get started. I don't know exactly what all you have there, but your people are going to get with my people, Rob. They're going to figure out what goes over there. So if a person's interested, they get whatever they need to get started. All right.
Absolutely. Mitch, thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Hey, thank you. And I want to thank taxfreefuture.com for being the sponsor. Please go to taxfreefuture.com and check out what your financial advisors are not telling you. We're going to tell you what they're not telling you and why, and it'll make sense. All right, my friends. This was Rob Walch with Libsyn, one of the biggest podcast hosting companies in the world. And it's been a pleasure. Thanks.